Who doesn't remember the Iceman? The mohawk-having, biker dude-looking marauder that helped MMA get into the mainstream. I always thought Chuck looked like a more refined version of Tank, leaner, more precise, and having more weapons. With his iconic ice blue trunks and his headhunting style, Chuck punched and kicked his way into the hearts of MMA fans, one knockout at a time. And even though he looked like someone that would probably mug you and take your Air Jordans just so he could buy more meth, Chuck was anything but. He was humble, soft-spoken, and always respectful. In fact, the tattoo on Chuck's head reads Koei Kan, which translates to a place of peace and prosperity. And I would go so far as to say that's just what he felt while he was putting motherfuckers to sleep in the cage. Peace and prosperity. And he is in the Hall of Fame, so there's always that. Charles David Liddell was born in Santa Barbara, California, and was raised by his single mother and grandfather, who would introduce Chuck to boxing by teaching him how to throw a jab and slip. Later, Chuck would get into karate and wrestling, becoming a D1 wrestler at California Polytechnic State University in Obispo, actually graduating with a BA in business and accounting. Yes, in some parallel universe, the Iceman would have been an accountant. So instead of crunching faces, he would have been crunching numbers. Chuck had a short stint in the amateur kickboxing scene with a record of 20 wins and 2 losses respectively. When Chuck would finally transition to MMA in '98, he would start off beating his first 2 opponents via decision and losing his third pro fight to legend Jeremy Horn via arm triangle choke. But that loss would do little to stop the rise of Liddell, because he would go on a 10-fight tear with notable wins over absolute fucking savages, guys you would tell your new students at the gym cautionary tales about, MMA boogeymen straight out of the dark ages before Tony Ferguson ever stepped into the octagon, guys like Jeff Monson, a 5'9" roided out submission specialist who ended his career at 61 wins, 26 losses, with 36 of those wins by submission. Kevin the Monster Randleman, perhaps best known for pretending to be Fedor Emelianenko's chiropractor and trying to paralyze him with the most horrific suplex I have seen. Amar Suluev, the guy that got a submission named after him, the Suluev stretch, where he basically pulls your leg across your chest over your head in an attempt to make you suck your own kielbasa or kielbasa, however the fuck you say that. Vitor Belfort, everybody knows him, who at the time was juiced to the fucking gills. I'm sure if USADA had been around, they would have had to use a Geiger counter to test him. And Babalu himself, Renato Sobral, the former Strikeforce light heavyweight champion. After using Sobral's head as a soccer ball, Chuck would get his first shot at UFC Gold, facing the natural Randy Couture. The UFC had tried to book Chuck versus Tito Ortiz, who held the light heavyweight belt at the time, but due to scheduling difficulties had to be cancelled. So an interim bout was set up. Ironically though, Randy managed to outstrike Chuck and ended up taking him down and mounting him, securing the TKO. After losing to Randy, Chuck would go to the land of otakus and samurais and take part in Pride Total Elimination, the Grand Prix tournament in 2003. You see, back then there was this rivalry between Pride FC and the UFC as to who had the better fighters. Naturally, Pride did have some mean motherfuckers on the roster at the time, like Crow Cop, Fedor, Overeem, Nogueira, and of course Sakuraba. After a lot of shit talking between both Pride and UFC brass, it was decided that one fighter would fly over and act as a sort of representative for the UFC, and that fighter would be Chuck. Liddell would face young Alistair Overeem before he fell into a vat of Trembolone and became Ubereem. You see, the Dutch have always been known for producing good kickboxers, and Overeem was no exception. Overeem blasted Chuck with disgusting knees, and for a while it looked like Overeem was going to get the KO with his more technical stand-up, but Chuck managed to land an overhand that rocked Overeem and went in for the kill. I remember watching this fight back in the day and almost shit my fucking pants from the damn suspense. That was Pride, man. Chuck would move on to face Rampage as his next opponent in the tournament, only to lose via corner stoppage after a freaking slugfest. Chuck would return to America pissed off and immediately go to work clearing out the light heavyweight division, racking up 7 wins in a row, running through Tito Ortiz at UFC 47 with that crazy combo that would make old school Street Fighter players cream their fucking pants. After coaching The Ultimate Fighter Season 1, Chuck would face his old rival Randy Bobandy again at UFC 52 for the light heavyweight strap, knocking him out in the first round. And at UFC 54, Liddell would defend his belt and avenge his first loss against Jeremy Horn. UFC 57 would pit Chuck against Couture for the third and final time. After a competitive first round, Chuck managed to KO Randy yet again. Randy would officially retire after the fight. Chuck would defend his belt again against Babalu, winning via TKO at UFC 62, as well as defeating Tito Ortiz again at UFC 66, while suffering from a torn MCL and a damaged middle finger. Chuck had now defended his belt 4 times and just showed incredible durability. Chuck always had an iron chin and an ability to recover very fast. He was like Wolverine with his freakish healing factor. But UFC 66 would be the last time the Iceman would send someone to the Shadow Realm, and mark the beginning of the end for the Marauder. Chuck would lose 6 out of his next 7 fights. 5 of those would be via knockout. At UFC 71, he would get KO'd by Rampage, losing the belt. That granite chin had finally gotten cracked. Rumors had been circulating that Liddell had been partying the night before, but Chuck said even though the rumors were true, that was nothing new. Chuck would lose to the Dean of Mean via decision, but would rebound and win his long-awaited fight against the Axe Murderer, Vanderlei Silva, at UFC 79, earning Fight of the Night as well as Fight of the Year. Sadly, that would be Chuck's final victory. After viciously getting knocked out in his next fights, the fans as well as Dana started to wonder if the Iceman's time was over, if it wasn't time to hang up the gloves, if Chuck could compete at this level anymore. Dana even said, "I care about him, I care about his health, and it's over, man." Dana and Chuck obviously went back and forth about the subject because Dana later said, "Can I tell him not to fight? If he still wants to fight, he can fight." When Chuck was asked about the subject, he had remarked, "It's hard for an athlete to quit what he has done his whole life." As much as we all loved watching the Iceman fight, watching him slowly degrade before our very eyes was equally painful as it was sad. Nobody wants to see their heroes slowly get destroyed, but oftentimes that indomitable will that drives these men can turn from strength to weakness if it is not tempered with wisdom. After his loss to Rich Franklin, Dana White declared that Chuck Liddell would never fight in the UFC again. On December 29th, 2010, at the UFC 125 presser, an emotional Chuck Liddell retired from the sport of MMA, riding into the sunset.
Just go! Attack! Attack, baby! Attack like the golden boy!
Unfortunately, Coquette De La Hoya came along and decided that his fight promotion douche boy wanted to do MMA fights now. So in 2018, somehow he managed to create an event with Tito and Chuck headlining it. The whole thing was a freak show, and not the good kind like Pride used to do, but the sad, pathetic kind where you wished it had never happened. De La Hoya could barely remember the fighters' names, either due to too much coke or brain damage. It was hard to tell. Needless to say, the whole thing was very depressing, with Chuck getting KO'd in the first round by Tito, and so ended the Iceman's career. So, when it was all said and done, what are we left with? Another pioneer of the sport who gave us great fights and earned his place in the Hall of Fame? To me, Chuck will always be that headhunter, that marauder with that iron chin who just put people away. Chuck was part of the elite old guard that helped grow the sport. And for those of you who maybe came to the sport after his time, I recommend you go watch his fights, because in his prime, Chuck was fucking scary. Sadly though, the evolution of the sport was so fast that if you slow down for a second, you're past. Despite that fact, the Iceman will always be a legend.